Today we'll be looking at the final aspect of our conversation, which is the execution gap. The execution gap. Richmond, if you will, just do a quick recap of what we did last week or what we've done in the last 3 weeks and what we'll be doing today. And let's sort of bring the conversation to a close, if you like.
Right. So good afternoon. And we'll do our best today to make sure we capture almost everything that is outstanding on this topic. So for the past 4 weeks, we've been looking at managing talent for profitability, or talent management for profitability. And our focus has been on how you connect strategy, people, and process ultimately to make you profitable. But largely we have been looking at the people side, the people strategy side, in terms of how you let your talents work to change your bottom line, particularly in these times. So when we began with week 1, we looked at an overview and we put that in context, particularly with the global pandemic and how it has affected the economics of the world. And then we zeroed into sub-Saharan Africa and we looked at how the coronavirus situation has affected work and business and how it is even linked up to why you must take the subject of talent management and profitability a little bit more serious than you might have. Then from the overview, the subsequent week, we looked at what we call the key components of talent management. So we looked at the entire value chain of talent, from hiring, attracting, all the way through interviewing, developing, getting the right set of people, and then putting them into a contract performance management system, giving them the right tools, the right skill set, the right working environment, the culture, the systems, and things like that, to the point where now they deliver the exact goals or the exact deliverables that has been signed. And then we looked last week, we looked at what exactly are the most important strategies that are right in the application of your talent. So we looked at applying the right strategies and we shared a number of thoughts last week. So far, let me say that the feedback has been great and a number of businesses have asked that we walk them through practically to get them to make this a reality, going particularly into 2021. And so if you're a business listening, today's version where we are looking at the execution gap even makes more important reason that you take it a little bit more serious. Why? Because this is the time all businesses are looking at strategy and how they fine-tune, review the year 2020, outcomes against deliverables, and then based on that, they can take their teams into a strategy session, whereas by the end of November, every strategy should be fine-tuned, submitted to the board for approval. By first week December, we know the numbers you are going to be looking at for 2021. We know how everybody is contributing to same. And then we even begin 2021 in the last month of 2020. If you don't get this done and you now begin to think about strategy, goals, and objectives in the first month of 2021, you'll be late already, and you will not be able to manage the ties and things like that. So how do you close the execution gap?
Richmond, just before you go to the execution gap, you talked about strategy. Maybe just chip in briefly for our listeners and our business owners also, the link between strategy and budget, because a lot of them are doing their budgets now, but they're not thinking strategy now. They're thinking strategy in January, and why it's important that budget must feed into strategy.
So when we say strategy is the 360-degree outlook of what the organization wants to become. And so it has the people component, it has a process component, and then it has the budget component. And so I have said time and again that the key components of talent management and profitability, one of the critical ones, is how you link strategy and budget. And if you look at the two constructs we shared from day one, there is a strategy part and then there's a talent part for profitability. And so don't just look at budget, don't just look at targets, that is what we want to achieve. It is actually of no use when it doesn't sit at the center of strategy, because strategy is about what you are going to do to achieve what you want. And if that is not captured, if that is not clarified, it's one of the reasons why there's an execution gap, and I'll explain it when we get in there. So if you just concentrate on budget and you throw it at people and you don't even immerse the hands, the minds, the brains, the hearts into the strategy behind the numbers, you'll be amazed. It will just be numbers that will have to probably be revised as the realities hit you when you get into the execution mode. And so when that situation happens, when you are just looking at budgets or targets, and it has virtually nothing to do with strategy, there will be an execution gap. I can promise you that. And then you notice that you might have set targets and you might have signed contracts with your people, but then there is a gap between what you want to achieve and the real performance on the ground and on the bottom line. So it's one of the reasons why there will be a definite execution gap going into the bottom lines of your business. So today, let's probably correct that. If you have not done that and you are just putting together the numbers and it has nothing to do with strategy, it is one of the qualifications or one of the critical down points that will make you not execute. So to really appreciate how you close the execution gap, first let me explain what the execution gap is. The execution gap is simply the difference between the specified outcomes of profitability or any deliverables organization sets and the inability to bring it into closure. So just as an example, maybe that shop, you wanted to sell maybe 2 cartons of, say, a particular product, and you have benchmarked the commission and the benefits to the people who are going to be selling that from the shop to the numbers they sell. Now, it is based on that you have made revenue projections, and it's out of the revenue projections that you have taken out your cost element and even projected for profit after tax and all that. And those ones are probably even determine how you are going to be expanding the business, how you are going to be putting in a number of investments. Because you set this in stone, when that kind of plan doesn't materialize and other things that were never thought of, maybe like emergencies, maybe like market disruptions, like what has happened this year, maybe like environmental or political difficulties, or any of the things that border on the threat and the weakness part of SWOT in your SWOT analysis, you notice that you might have done so much and gone ahead of you in terms of what you want to achieve. But then day in, day out, you don't see the things you said you wanted to achieve. And there seems to be a very vast difference between your anticipation in terms of what you want to achieve and what your team or your talents are bringing to bear every day. That is the execution gap. That after all is said and done, you don't see the reality of what you want them to do and the bottom line of their daily routine. That is the execution gap. And to close that execution gap, if you are watching us on Facebook, you will know that I start this session with the profitability construct once again. And the profitability construct is simply just giving us a narrative. You will notice that it begins with the employer and ends with profitability. Now, the distance between the employer and profitability is when the execution gap is closed. And all the things in there at the center of this diagram is what makes the execution possible. Because execution is getting things done when they are supposed to be done, by what time and all that. So if you don't concentrate on the things that make up the execution, then you are going to have a lot of problems because you might have spent on many things. So this construct simply brings down the execution gap and its realization into 3 main things that I want you to know. Number 1 is people. Number 2 is strategy. And number 3 is process. So when you look at the profitability construct, everything in there is saying that to close your execution gap, take a look at your people, connect them to process. Process means operations. And then connect the operations to strategy. So then the strategy will now be able to tell and review what exactly must be done to achieve that. So for you to do these 3 things and harness them, remember we've shared with you how you manage the people side. Remember we've also shared with you how you manage operations. And we said that you cannot become successful at execution when operations or process is very distinct or separated entirely from what people do. You must let whatever the people do and become as in talent be linked up to their operations. And the operations here will mean daily routine that shows up in the customer's deliverable or what the customer earns at the end of the day. Now, when these 3 things have been understood and set in stone, I go to my next slide and I show you a template that talks about what the execution gap looks like. And on that template, you see that most of the time, you will see that there will be an average 37% loss in terms of actual execution. And so maybe you wanted to achieve, say, 10, you're likely to probably achieve 6 in all levels. Now, how do you avoid this? You avoid this when, on the people side, you clearly distinguish between cost centers and revenue centers. So for you, the organization, there are departments in the organization that are basically not revenue driven per se directly. So maybe the research department, maybe even the accounts department, or maybe the front desk possibly. And then you have the revenue centers that are directly sales driven. So maybe the sales people, the customer relationship management people, and things like that. When you do this distinction, then you try and leverage or align the costs for the talents that are in the cost centers and the talents that are in the revenue centers. And you do your alignment such that the cost centers do not bring cost implications that outweigh the revenues of those that bring revenue. So the people in administration, they are great, but they don't have direct revenues that come out of their work. But then they make operation work. And so you must make sure that the cost of the administration team does not overpower and write out the revenue that the people who are driving direct revenue are bringing in. When you do that, then you have an execution gap, because in this table, you will see that the things that bring about lack of performance for execution, one of those critical things is inadequate resources. Inadequate resources causes a lot of execution gaps, because then you don't just say, I want to achieve this budget. Anytime you say, I want to achieve this budget or target, there is always a cost component that must drive the realization of that target. And for you not to create a gap where you have set a target but you can't deliver, then you have to deal with what will bring an execution gap. And critical is inadequate or unavailable resources. And so if you cannot give the team that will drive revenue with the exact cost of delivering on that revenue, then you are not going to deliver, because then he cannot go out there if there is no provision of resource to deliver. That is why you have to distinguish between the cost centers and the revenue centers. And you just do your best to make sure that the cost center, which only produces cost and facilitates the operation side of driving business and execution, does not bring costs that outweigh the revenue centers, so that you don't fall into the trap of the 7.5 indication of inadequate resources or resources that are not available. The next thing that you must also tackle to close execution for your talent and their deliverables is communicating strategy well. Now, for many organizations, strategy only sits in the minds and on papers that are captured in the executive's office. And so it is only maybe the chief marketing officer, the executive directors, the heads of departments who appreciate to an extent the strategy, say, going into 2021. Because probably they've gone into a strategy session, sometimes with consultants, sometimes with head of strategy and things like that. And the knowledge and the understanding and the execution of how they are going to achieve the budget sits only with them. And it is not communicated the same way they appreciate it to everybody in the organization. When that happens, you'll be amazed that because the people do not appreciate strategy the way the top appreciate it, then there will be no involvement and there will be no commitment, because there is a disruption in terms of how strategy is appreciated. So that from the word go, everybody appreciates why the organization is going the direction it is going, and everybody can contribute their effort and their part to make it work. So from now, make sure that in addition to setting strategy, it is communicated clearly and everybody sees the strategy the same way the leadership sees strategy. If you don't do that, you'll be amazed that you are at the top and you are supposedly the convener, you are supposedly the custodian of strategy, but the people who have their hands down on the ground and boots on the ground to deliver strategy may be doing something else that is entirely opposite what you want to achieve. And when that happens, you notice that for poor communication of strategy, you will not get things executed the way they should be. The next important one is actions that are required to execute. Actions that are required to execute. You know, if you want to close your execution gap in your organization, it is not just about budgets, or it is not just about anticipations, or it's not just about expectations. It's about what must be done. And usually we leave what must be done undefined. And we assume that because the person has a job description, because the person has a target to perform, because the person knows that if he doesn't perform, he can probably refer into a performance improvement program, and if he fails that also, he may be shown the way out. We usually don't define what is expected in terms of action. So we agree that this department and that department, this is your contribution to strategy in executing what we want to achieve. Every team leader must clearly communicate that strategy, one, and number two, must define as much as possible what must be done on a daily basis to achieving that strategy. If you just leave it as it is, sometimes maybe in the name of I don't want to micromanage. Micromanaging is when you have defined the action point and almost every now and then you are still telling them what to do. But we are talking about defining clearly what success looks like and telling them what must be done when you have discussed together. So you don't also just come and say this is what we are going to do. Sometimes you even have the way out to tell the team what they are going to do, but you think for them with them. If you think for them with them, they own the action points and they deliver it as if it's their own. So you must shepherd the strategy and the action points defined together with the team. And that is why it's important that particularly in times like this, companies must go into their strategy sessions together with everybody, sometimes in teams, so that strategy is broken down and deliberate action points are defined clearly for everybody to appreciate. So actions that are required to execute on deliverables must be clearly defined. If they don't, you'll be hot in terms of execution. Then the next important thing is accountabilities for execution. Having defined the actions, everybody in the organization must see what they are accountable for and how it traces up from what they do to the bottom line in terms of strategy. And this is important. So in your people war room, you should be able to pick every team, and in every team, you should be able to break down everybody's deliverable in terms of what exactly it is they are accountable for and trace it to what they are doing together with strategy. And so when everybody meets as a team, they can tell for every single individual their accountability. It's clearly defined. Everybody knows what is it they are supposed to do. They don't always have to wait for you to tell them what they should do. If that is also clearly defined, then even when you are not present, execution continues. If you don't do this, you would always have to be present before things are done the way they should be done. But that is not leadership. For you to lead well, it must be so clearly defined in terms of actionables and accountability such that even when circumstances and difficulties and emergencies take you away from the team, business execution still runs and you don't need to be there. If this doesn't happen, you notice that anytime there is a small change in leadership, everything comes to ground zero, and the team will be waiting for another leader to come and then bring up reason, to come and bring up energy to fight, because they don't know what to do next. They lived each day by your instruction. When that happens, there will be execution gap. The next thing is organizational silos and culture blocking execution. I have had problems with this in many organizations I've consulted for, that you get into the organization and the accounts department is a silo, the client service department is a silo, the research unit is a silo, and they all see themselves as different people working for different goals, having different bosses, and so they don't see the connection between, say, the front desk or the client service team and the accounts or the finance team. When that happens, it is a culture that kills execution, because when for example your check that must be delivered to the client hits the account department, they don't put the same agency that the client you are dealing with at the front desk sees, and so when it gets to the accounts department, it's in their world, and they have no feeling, they have no essence of what it means to deliver on the timeline you expect it to have. It will just be there. And sometimes when you even follow up on them, they think you are becoming a bother, because there is a disconnect between what you are doing and what they are doing. And it's as if you are different companies. Particularly when the organization have different executive directors and they don't report under one boss. Because the other guy knows that he reports already to a different boss, and the other department also reports to a different boss. If he doesn't deliver on his goal, he thinks, there's no way his boss is going to punish him, because it is your boss you are reporting to, and your boss's instruction is not my instruction. When that happens, execution breaks down. And so people just do work in silence.
Sometimes you even hear comments like, I don't report to you.
You see? It shows up. And when that happens, nothing gets done. But this will be because strategy was not communicated in such a way that every department is working towards one common goal. So when the guy who does sales comes and brings an account, the customer service person knows that I need to set up the account in this number of times, turnaround time, so I can deliver to the customer service person. When the customer service person is done and there's a deposit, the account department know that in this turnaround time, I need to make sure the deposit is showing on the customer's account. So there is like a telepathy across all units, and there's nothing like silos. When that happens, execution is seamless. If that doesn't happen, you will see that there will be organizational silos and there will be culture blocking execution. So sometimes another department's success looks like a disadvantage to another. And so why should they help you people? Because when bonus comes, you are the only people who are going to get bonus. Meanwhile, you don't bring revenue. You only do administration. But when bonus comes, you earn more than me. And so that even makes things worse, and it kills execution. The next thing is inadequate performance monitoring. Performance monitoring is one critical anchor that can help a company or an organization or a small business deliver and close on the execution gap. Why? Because many times we see performance management or performance monitoring as specific time schedule. And so maybe we do performance management once a month or once a quarter or half yearly or end of year. No. If you want to close execution gap, performance management is a daily routine. And so when you tag deliverables to the outcomes in strategy, you should be able to tell every day's job and how it takes us closer to the ultimate goal. If you can't do that and monitor daily, and you the supervisor, the only time you go and check on results is end of week when people are now submitting their results. You are supervising failure, which would have become fact. Because if you are waiting for end of year to check results before you notice that this department didn't deliver on their goals, it is fact. It has already happened. You can't change it after that time. So your monitoring should be daily on time, so that even if there is a mix-up somewhere, you are able to correct it before the event happens in a report you receive, and you now go and correct it.
Real time monitoring.
Real time, so that when you do that, you are monitoring in such a way that by the time you end a certain period, you would have corrected whatever would have caused an execution gap. You don't wait. And that is what we say inadequate performance monitoring can hurt execution. Then inadequate consequences or rewards for failure or success. Inadequate consequences for failure or success. So again, when I achieve my goals as a member of the team, or when the entire unit achieve their goals, what does it mean in terms of rewards? It must be clearly spelled out, and it must be done. Sometimes, even when the organization together is unable to meet their budget goals, and one unit is able to deliver on theirs, it's important to show the reward or the consequence of delivering, so that other people get to know that this is what it means when we deliver, and this is what it means when we don't deliver. Both sides. Again, if people don't deliver, spell out in strategy that if you don't deliver, this is what you do, this is what you go through. And it is not people sensitive. It is not title sensitive. It doesn't depend on anything. It's a process, and everybody goes through that process. So everybody is encouraged. When they look at achieving and not achieving what it brings, then everybody looks at it and they're able to deliver. That also helps you in execution, and it doesn't bring any gap in terms of what you are able to do. So be careful to show clearly what it means for success or failure. The next thing is poor senior leadership. Leadership, again, is not just position. And so I'll share with you that leadership is not just title.